Let's say that you have watched the other videos in this series about emotional abuse, you heard the definition of emotional abuse, and all of a sudden you're realizing, hey, this is a problem that I have. I am doing this. I am abusive, and you want to get better, you want to stop. How do you get past the stigma and the shame around being abusive to turn yourself in and actually start to heal? That's exactly what we are exploring in this video interview with Andrea J Lee about stopping emotional abuse. I'll put the link in the corner to the entire playlist. If you missed the other videos, it's a good place to start, especially the first one, Am I Abusive?, where we really went into a very, very clear definition of what is considered emotional abuse. And before we get right into it, I just want to say thank you to all of the new subscribers. My YouTube channel is really taking off right now. It's so exciting, and I'm really, really happy you're here. Let's get into today's video. It is so amazing, this footage from the interview with Andrea, and I'm so excited to share it with you. How did you move past the shame of being an abusive person and to be public about it?
So interestingly for me, I I won't say I didn't have any shame, but I didn't have to get over shame in order to be public about it. Public about my emotional abuse. I really had a very strong feeling of, because I had worked so hard and because my husband had gone through so much, it really felt like it had to be for something, like it's wonderful and it's incredible to have this relationship now where we've gone through like really, really tough stuff. And there's a real sweetness that's very precious as a result of that. But I felt like, you know what? God darn it, we worked really hard and this should be worth something. There's not a lot out there to help people on this. So, like, are we safe? Do we feel good about that we will be known for having had this relationship? Make sure that consent was there and permission. I think honestly that like no one should feel ashamed about this. And not only that we should not feel ashamed about it, it's kind of a mixed thing to say we should not feel shame. Like, I'm not shaming you for feeling ashamed. If you feel shame, that's totally fine. But when we see violence on TV, for example, whatever it is in the political situation right now, or in like climate change with Mother Nature, all the violence that we see, I firmly believe that the violence we see on TV has started inside a home somewhere. All that violence has started inside a home somewhere. So when you go to the grocery store and you see someone yelling at their kids, okay, that person who's doing the yelling, there was violence in that person's home that they learned that from. When you see like a scene where there's warfare or there was riots or a shooter, gun violence, whatever, that stuff we see in the news started inside a home with the way that person was spoken to or treated somewhere down the line. So how can we be ashamed? Like it's everywhere. It's like being ashamed of like doing laundry and shrinking a shirt once in a while. It's what we live in. And until we're able to really own that, like I don't know, it troubles me that we speak so much about domestic violence victims and we don't see the flip side of it. If there are that many abuse victims, then there are that many abuse perpetrators. We have to stop feeling shame about it. So I know that, for me, shame wasn't as big of a thing in my journey, but I do know that it comes up and that people experience it. So um, I think that shame actually has a very big role for people who feel it, that it is part of what keeps us honest and on the path to change. There's a saying, it's by Carl Jung. It goes something like this: discipline is obedience to awareness. So when you think about changing behavior, let's say emotional abuse, like or a pattern of being angry in your relationships, the discipline it takes to change is going to be fueled by your awareness. The more you're aware, the more you will be able to be disciplined to change. So Discipline is obedience to awareness means that your shame is actually what's keeping you aware. And that's good. We need and want you to be aware. It's like, I feel ashamed. Great. Guess what? What are you going to do instead of yell? What are you going to do instead of hit? What are you going to do instead of manipulate or lie? It's good. Shame can be our ally in this.
Yeah, and I think the main way that I was thinking about shame was that shame about being abusive keeps us from talking about this and from really being able to face it. So yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think that one of the things I just appreciate about you so much is that you're being vocal.
Right. I got you. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. That's the thought you had around the word shame. Yeah. So, I mean, as far as the roots of it, it's like, why is it so, like, first of all, if it's not clear yet, I think of emotional abuse as like any kind of illness. It's contagious, like violence has been proven to be contagious. A great website for that is cureviolence.org. It's spearheaded by Dr. Gary Slutkin. It's been shown through studies of gang violence that if you're surrounded by violence, you will become more violent. It's transmissible, just like a cold or a flu or any other kind of thing. And so humans being born onto planet Earth and needing food and drink and needing shelter and to survive, we in our very makeup need things in order to live. And pressure and limits and lack and scarcity and all those things are kind of part of the human experience. It's like, well, if you didn't have enough food, then you died. If you didn't have shelter, then you froze. So the stress of being a human is just a fact of life. Now in modern society, post-industrial revolution, it's the same thing. We have to have a job or we're going to die. That's what it feels like. We're going to have no money and no rent and then no food and then we're going to die. For that reason, I think that these emotional abuse, this widespread abuse and violence is sourced from that original sense of survival. And so safety is a big word, like being safe enough, creating for yourself a life where you have a sense of relaxing into things are going to be okay is really important for not being a violent person.
Just 5 days ago, or in Canada, I think 5 days ago, the Governor General, which is a really high position in the government, Julie Payette, she was resigned from office because she was being abusive to all the people that were working with her, emotionally abusive, and they were, there was a lot of her staff that were really traumatized by being in that environment. So it's just this perfect example of how these kinds of abuses are really bubbling to the surface, and to me it's the time we're in, is that like this is being addressed, whether we want to address it or face it or not, is actually coming up to be addressed. But I think it's also a good example of why people will be hesitant to admit that they have this problem, because the moment, like if you look at the news coverage, there's absolutely no compassion towards Julie Payette. It's like everybody loves to throw their disdain and disgust at the perpetrator. So I think maybe that's where the fear comes about outing yourself as having this problem.
With regards to the difficulty of outing yourself when let's say you had a really bad fight with, your relationship and you go to work the next day, do you say something? Let's say you spanked your child and you're shocked that you did what you did, or let's say you were terrible to a colleague at work or something, do you admit that? I I think that it is difficult and it is valid that you are not outing yourself. There's definitely, what I don't want to see is that people are outing themselves and then there's nothing to catch them, that they don't have support to try and get better. They don't, we don't want to out you and then create more stress and more strain, because you're only going to get more angry. If that's the case, you're going to only have more emotional stuff come out. So that's the issue, when someone so prominent like Julie Payette, Governor General of Canada, is outed. My question is always, okay, who's with her right now? Is she seeing someone? This is not, if she has young children at home, that would be really awful for them. Like there there is a book called Returning to the Teachings. It's by Rupert Ross. It's also a Canadian story, actually. And it is about reparations and like restorative justice within Indigenous communities in Canada. And in it, there's a really incredible story that is about a community where there was sexual abuse happening. And basically the short version of the story is that at the end of the work that community did, they were able to create such a safe place for perpetrators of that violence to voluntarily raise their hand and say, I am in trouble, I'm hurting my family, I need help. They were so successful in that community that there were people volunteering themselves, turning themselves in. The process of restorative justice is outlined in that book that they use. The whole book is about this situation and how they handled it. And I on point blank, that's what we need. We need a place, we need a world, we need a community where when we're sick, when we are hurting and need help, when things have gotten beyond our control, that we can turn ourselves in and we can receive the appropriate compassion, support, and consequences.
That's amazing. It reminds me of a chapter in Alchemy of Consciousness, the book that I channeled, that
Mm.
is talking about that in this game of life, really, we are all wrongdoers and we're all right doers, and you cannot escape being in the role of wrongdoer, because even if you do right, you could still be in the view of someone else perpetrating something that's harmful. Like even if you're totally aligned, so knowing that, it's like, oh, okay, well, let's all get really okay with that. We're going to cause harm in this life, and then the whole point of that is to learn real forgiveness and real, like, what does it look like to actually do the work of moving in the direction of reparation and taking the actions of making things whole again.
Mm-hmm. It's so beautiful. I mean, it is all linked, like for me, part of the motivation for changing was also that, I wanted to be someone who could help the world change. And if I couldn't say that I could change myself, then I really had no right to try and change the rest of the world. There's another saying that's like, sick leaders make sick countries. So like people think that it's not connected. It's like we're kind of disembodied, right? That what I do as an individual, yeah, it helps the world, but not really. it it there is no stronger thing you can do than to really enact change in your life and stop being a person who's trying to not be abusive, stop being a person who's trying to not be a bully or trying to not lie or trying to stop gaslighting, and visualize that person who has stopped, that it's in the past, that it's complete, that it's way behind you. And that was one of my favorite visualizations. There was something about, as great as it is, the coaching world and the self-help world that perpetuates this like okayness, or even like this acknowledgement that you're improving something, like I want a world where we've finished improving things. We finish and then we move on to the next thing. We finish and then we move on to the next thing. So yeah, and the confidence it gives you when you can say, "Yep, I'm now no longer an abusive person. I am now completely confident that it doesn't really matter what happens. That I'm going to know what I need and that I'm not going to harm another person." Um, Without having gone through the tough stuff, I don't think I would have that same peace and ownership of that. So I know, Karen, like I'm not a super religious person, but I am brought up in the Buddhist culture. And I fully agree that, suffering and the dark, violence, all that is here as a gift for us to understand what it means to get beyond that. We wouldn't have enlightenment if we didn't have stuff to get enlightened from.
Totally. How do you see yourself advancing this topic further into the world? Like, is this something you're working on, or that you are sharing in any way, or working with people on, or?
Yeah. I am continuing to write about it and really focus my writing addressing abusive individuals who want to change. There really isn't that much out there that speaks directly to that part of you that sometimes is abusive or a bully. And so I have a blog, Stop Being Abusive. We Can Stop Being Abusive, it's called. And my intention, my hope is to get published and have a book, couple of titles maybe eventually on this topic, because there needs to be a place that's very clear and very mainstream that this problem is real. It is dominant in our society. It needs a ton more research. It needs funding to address it. It is like when you go to domestic violence conferences, believe it or not, there are domestic violence conferences. There are like focused on violence and interpersonal violence. It's honestly, it's wonderful, needed work, but it's a little disconcerting because you go and there are thousands of people in attendance, and there's out of hundreds of sessions, there's only a handful about perpetrators and how to treat perpetrators and what works in terms of therapy for them. So I'm just one person, but if I can tell the truth about it and keep writing about it, I really hope that more people will be like you to say, yeah, we need to use our platforms to get this message out, put pressure on, policy and research and funding to make this more of a collective awareness and a collective effort. If we can rehabilitate abusive people, bullies, perpetrators who want to change, we're going to bring so many people back into the fold. We're going to bring so much good energy into creating the world that works for everybody.
Again, I'm so grateful to Andrea for her amazing wisdom. I'm putting below all of the links to the relevant topics that she had talked about so you can get in touch with her and follow her work. In the next video in the series, we're going to look at the same topic, but from the other side of why do people stay in abusive relationships, and why in particular Andrea's husband stayed, and then also how he was able to begin to stop being abused, and how people can really stop being abused if they are in that abusive dynamic type relationship. I look forward to sharing that with you. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for having the courage to look at this topic, to look at yourself, and I will see you again soon.